Well, I want you to imagine a courtroom scene, and there was a woman who had been called in to testify. She was a doctor of psychology, and she was one of these women that was prim, proper, a perfectionist, and diabolical. You didn't want to mess with her in a bar fight. If you looked wrong, sideways at her, there was going to be hell to pay. Just kind of that vibe that she had. And so she was called up onto the witness stand. And she looked, and the district attorney who was there, she despised this man. And she was disgusted. He got up from his chair, and he came around, and she was sworn in. She goes up on the witness stand. And just before she sits down, a few people in the audience or in the courtroom noticed that the back of the witness chair, the two legs on the back side of the chair, were perilously close to the back of the platform. And when she sat down in that chair, it got even a little closer. And the DA got up and he said, well, would you state your name? And this woman just could hardly stand this guy. She folded her arms across like this, just gave him a glare that was like just pierced through him. And she leaned back in her chair, and the next moment, she was flying backwards, back in behind. She tumbled back into a pile of books and evidence and some recording equipment. And she had exhibited enough fear in that courtroom that nobody said a word. They just watched this play out. She finally got herself up, and she got her dress back from being disheveled. And she took her time to redo her hair. And she put the chair back up on the witness stand. And when she stood up on the witness stand, she glared out at everybody with that kind of look that said, if any of you dare smirk at me, I'll kill you. That kind of look. So she sat down. Well, the DA had watched all this, and he didn't like her either. And without missing a beat, and in the same vein as he had asked her the first question, he said, well, doctor, we could start with an easier question. What is your name? Could start with an easier question. Well, that is the title of today's message, Asking Questions. And this is part 3 of our series, Witnessing Made Easier. By way of review, in week 1, we looked at engage. Engage with people. Take the initiative. Build some friendships. Build some relationships. Look how you can serve. Look how you can be an encouragement. Just make an effort to engage. Last week, Greg took us through the importance of prayer. And this is more than just praying, because oftentimes we make witnessing harder because we think it's our job to change somebody's heart. And that is impossible to do. Only God can change the human heart. And that's one of the reasons prayer is so important. It takes the pressure off of you to have to make something happen in witnessing. And today we're looking at the simple task of asking questions. Now, there are ways that we make witnessing more difficult than it needs to be. And the first way is we have some faulty assumptions. Sometimes it's our assumption as we think about witnessing, we think it's a matter of being in the tell mode. And there is an element of tell, but it's kind of way down the road. It's not the beginning of this at all. And there's sort of this pressure that you feel to do this, and that's not good. Or sometimes we feel like a salesman, like we're trying to sell something to somebody, and people have a sales resistance to almost anything. My dad was a very successful salesman during his career, and one of the things he told me is if you want to be a successful salesman, you cannot think of yourself as in sales. What you have to think about is what need does this person have, and is there something you have that can meet it? You have to start with the person, not with the message or the product you're selling. So sometimes our assumptions are faulty. Another reason is sometimes people sense a proud attitude. If people sense that you're trying to sell them or trying to tell something or lecture them, then they naturally are going to make this more difficult. Sometimes they sense a superior attitude, even if it's just a small one, and that sets them off as well. And then sometimes I think we make witnessing harder than it needs to be because we haven't thought through our own testimony clearly enough to be able to say it simply. Now, we are going to start that process next Sunday and try to give you a one-sentence testimony and a one-minute testimony the following week and a 3-minute testimony the following week after that. But thinking through my testimony, Colossians 4:4 says, "Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should." So Paul wasn't just out there winging it, trying to share his testimony. He was asking God for clarity here. Now, sometimes non-Christians make witnessing more difficult than it would seem. There are some people, and this is kind of a duh, but that are just not ready to hear what you have to say. And that's okay. So that's okay as far as you as the witnesser. Matthew 7:6, Jesus said, "Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." Now, Jesus is not equating lost people or treating them as if they were dogs or pigs. What he's using is he's using two illustrations that are very common in that day that people could relate to and that had a point. The first one, he says, "Do not give dogs what is sacred." Now, I've had maybe 6 dogs over the course of my adult life, my entire life. And not one of them has been interested in doing Bible study with me. Sometimes the dogs have been in the house when it's time to pray over a meal. I have yet to see any of my dogs bow their head reverently. They just do not have an appetite for the things of God. And what Jesus is saying is that's sometimes with people with you. Sometimes they just don't have an appetite yet for the things of God. That's okay. You need to be patient. Then the second illustration, he talks about pigs. "Do not throw your pearls before swine," is the translation I memorized years ago. "Before pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." And the idea here is a pig does not value pearls. Now, that doesn't mean the pearls don't have value. It's just that the pig doesn't value those. Now, years ago, when I was in high school, my first real job was I was a soda jerk in a drugstore. And believe it or not, I was a cook. In fact, I was the only cook for about 3 hours. I was the only guy that worked there. Bottle washer, cashier, busboy, did everything. And as far as I know, people went on to live a productive life in spite of what they ate from me. But when I got there, the guy that hired me said, "We have a slop bucket here." It was about a 5-gallon white bucket. "And every time you're scraping food, don't scrape it down the disposal in the trash, scrape it into the slop bucket." And that slop bucket can get pretty nasty. And, you got half a cheeseburger, and you got some pickles and onions and some French fries and some apple pie. It just kind of all gets mashed in there. And yet, this is a delicacy for the pigs. And what Jesus was imagining here is he's putting in their minds, if you go out to feed the pigs and you've got your slop bucket, they are going to come to you when you're at the pig pen. If you walk into the pig pen, they're going to be all around you. And when you take that bucket and throw out the slop, they're going to be pretty happy campers. But if you imagine if instead of slop in there, you have pearls and you throw those out, you're going to have some angry pigs on your hand, and they may turn and attack you is what the idea here he says. Now, it's just that the pigs don't value what you value, the message of the gospel. So now what should you do if that happens according to Jesus? Well, you need to take out your wallet, or if you're ladies, you're out of your purse, and take out your guilt-free card. You can make one of these, put it in your wallet. This is your guilt-free card. You tried to share something with a non-Christian friend, and they just weren't that interested. Back off, take out your guilt-free card, and say, "Jesus, the next part is up to you." Now, Jesus also sent some disciples out for a mission trip, and before he sent them out, he gave them some instructions, and Jesus anticipated that some of them would run into some people who were not interested in what they had to say. They were just not ready. They did not value what the disciples came to bring. He says, if people do not welcome you, leave their town, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. Now here they were going to be talking to strangers. This is not a good thing to do with your neighbor or people at work. You're not going to shake the dust off, with your next door neighbor there. But what he's saying here is that there are times when people are not interested. And what would he do? He said, that's the moment to take out your guilt-free card from your wallet. Say, Jesus, the next step for these people is up to you. And be a friend. So sometimes other non-Christians make this more difficult. Now, on the inside of your handout, what can we do to help create interest in spiritual things? And there are some things that we can do. Matthew 11:19, speaking about Jesus, the Son of Man. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. Now, it's really interesting to me that the thing that he was accused of here was being a friend of sinners. Now, the leaders there thought that was a bad thing. But from Jesus' point of view, he was doing God's thing. He came alongside of sinners and was a friend to them. Now, what does this look like in everyday life? Well, people sense that we're a friend if they sense some humility in us and that we're interested in them, some kindness. Friendships with those things can be bonded pretty quickly. And that's something of what these people were sensing, the sinners here that they were talking about. He welcomes sinners and eats with them in Luke 15:1. The tax collectors were all gathering around to hear Jesus, the Pharisees and teachers of the law. He welcomes sinners and eats with them. Now, this would have been a great verse for our first message, engage. There's something about welcoming, being open, being transparent, engaging, and eating with people also infers something more than just a casual relationship. There's something of friendship here, or something that more than just an acquaintance. Now, one of my favorite stories related to witnessing comes from Acts 2:46 and 47. And it's sort of an unintuitive way of helping to create interest in people who have little spiritual interest. When Jesus was 12 years old, his family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, got in a caravan to go from Nazareth to Jerusalem for Passover. And Passover is one of those events where people from all over the world would travel, that one-time journey if you live far away. Kind of like you see that the Muslim world does on Ramadan, on the video. And so people were coming from all over the place, and the family gets there, they have Passover, and a few days later it's time to leave, and caravans are moving out northeast, south, and west. And Mary and Joseph and Jesus are taking off back in the caravan. And at some point, Mary and Joseph have that conversation that Mindy and I have had when our children were younger. Hey, have you seen Cole? No? I thought it was with you. I thought it was with you. Oh my gosh. And sure enough, one day in the early years of our church, I had left our 2-year-old son at church. And happened to be here in Irvine where there was one of those pedophile people out on the loose they couldn't find. And so I was racing back home, or back to where we were meeting for worship. And about the time I pulled into the parking lot and jumped out of the car, my son, my little toddler, comes around and he goes, hey, Dad, you ready to go? Well, Jesus was 12. And in the midst, no cell phones, no Google Maps, how do you contact somebody that's lost in the big city? Well, this is where Luke picks up this story. Luke 2:46. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them, and asking them questions. So visualize this. The temple courts in Jerusalem, and there are the bigwigs, the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, the scribes, and they're having a theological discussion among themselves. And you've got this 12-year-old kid, not quite a teenager. And what is he doing here? Well, Luke tells us he is listening to them and asking them questions. He's asking them questions. Now, he didn't go barging in as the shell answer man. He probably knew all the answers to the questions they were asking. But he went in with some humility and interest and respect for the people he was talking to. But notice the 180-degree change between verse 46 and verse 47. 47. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now, what happened here? Because of his respectful attitude, his listening, his humility, and asking questions, eventually somebody asked him questions. And when he opened his mouth to give some answers, they were listening. And in this particular case, they were amazed, as Luke says, at his understanding and answers, meaning they started to ask him questions. And this is one of those human nature things, relational things, where generally if people have sense about them, if you ask them a question and there's time, they'll reciprocate with that same question. And this is what was going on here. And they were amazed at his understanding and his answers. One of the things that happens here is relational trust has to be built. Relational trust with people at work or your neighbors or family members or people on sports teams. How is relational trust viewed? Well, it's viewed by several things. They're in your handout. Being interested in someone begins that process. Taking an interest, asking them questions. People love to talk about themselves. This is easy peasy. Asking questions. Third, listening to what they have to say. And fourth, some element of kindness in your response to whatever it is they're saying, even if you think it's off the wall. But there's something of trust that's built in that connection upon which witnessing can take place. Last week, Greg took us through Colossians 4:2 through 6. And the first few verses, verse 2, 3, and 4, all have to do with prayer and the importance of prayer as it regards to witnessing. But in verse 5, Paul gives us 5 important things to remember as we are trying to witness to people. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. So here the outsider is just another term for somebody that's not a Christian, not yet a Christian. Be wise in the way. Don't be a moron. Don't be abusive. Don't be rude. Second, make the most of every opportunity. And the idea here is that you're generally hoping to move the relationship towards a place where you can share your testimony or ask a spiritual question. But sometimes that takes time. And you know you don't want to be pushy. The other person doesn't want you to be pushy. But what Paul says here is see if you can take the next step. And see if the person is open to that next step. And if they're not open, then you just step back and continue on at the level of friendship that you are. Now, when I think about this, when I'm trying to share my faith with non-Christian friends, I have an image of my mind of this very thing. Years ago, when we lived in Texas, I remember going to a grocery store very early on a Saturday morning, and I didn't even know if it was opened yet. I think it might have been for baby stuff for Christy. That's how long ago this was. And I pulled into the parking lot. When I looked at the parking lot, it's like all the grocery stores here, glass all the way across the front. All the lights were on. I could see people milling around. And I'm walking in, but I don't know if it's opened. Of course, because there could be people who are stocking the shelves, from with the trucks and the stuff they bring in, or people that work there, they're getting ready, or the people that do the floors. There are lots of different things where people are busy before it opens. And as I got closer, I was trying to look, are there customers in there? And I couldn't really distinguish that. And I was walking kind of fast. And as I got up closer, I was looking for a sign that said, when is the store open? I didn't see one. And then just before I got there, I realized I'll know if the store is open when I step on the mat. If I step on that black mat and the door opens, it's open and I can take the next step in. If I step on the mat and the door doesn't open and I take the next step anyway, I'm going to have a knot on my head. A knot head for the knothead. This is simple regarding people. You take the next step. And if the next step, you get some resistance, you simply back off the mat. And you resume the friendship where you are. Now, in your handout, and if you didn't get a handout, Lance, would you pass some of these around on this side? Dave, would you pass some over on this side here? If you have a bulletin, you had a nice print of this already. You can pull that out. If you didn't get a bulletin, please take this out. What you have here is an excerpt from a delicious little book by David Pollock calling God's Space. And he has put the cookies on the bottom shelf for us regarding this, what he calls wondering questions. I wonder if you have like this. Sometimes it's very hard to sort of figure out, how do I move towards spiritual things? And what he's done here in this sheet is he's given you lots of things to think about, lots of maybe first questions that you would be comfortable asking a coworker or a friend or a neighbor. Now, we're going to walk through this list, and as we do, I want you to be thinking about, is there somebody, 1, 2, or 3 people I know that this question would be that next step on the mat kind of thing for me with that person? Okay? So this is the application time. You're trying to put together a question with a person. All right, so questions about life lessons. I've made it my lifelong goal to learn from others. What's the greatest lesson you feel you've learned so far in your life's journey? Now, that particular question is kind of a long question for me. I'd probably shorten it, but it's a great question. Tell me about your greatest success and your greatest failure along the way. Now, I'd probably just ask the first part of that question first. The second part, maybe you have to get to know the person a little better. Would you mind sharing with me the greatest piece of wisdom ever passed on to you? It's a good thought question. And it starts to move us into deeper kinds of connections with people. Questions about careers. What prompted you to pursue your career in so-and-so? What do you like most about what you do? What do you like least? Do you see this as a lifetime career or a stepping stone to something else? The idea is you're just slowly moving the relationship closer and closer to something personal, real, and deeper. Questions about talking about God. If someone wanted to talk to you about God, how would you like to be approached? Now, I would not ask that question myself, but some people might feel free with that question. Have you ever had anyone approach you and try to talk to you about God? What kinds of feelings are you left with after that encounter? If I hear somebody and I've asked, did you grow up in a church home? Did you have a church? And they say something like, no, I got turned off. Then a great follow-up to this question is, what happened? And that would be related to this. What images or words come to your mind when you hear the word evangelism? Now, I don't think I'd ever ask that question. The word evangelism means to proclaim good news. If that's true, why do you think this word carries so much baggage with it? If you were asked to describe the good news that evangelists are supposed to be sharing with people, how would you describe it? Questions about vocational dreams. What is your dream job? Are you working toward already? If not, what stands in your way? What advice would you give to a young person about finding vocational happiness? The purpose of this is just helping relationships become more personal, more meaningful, and deeper. What kind of exposure did you have to religion when you were growing up? I just usually ask, did you grow up in a church? Or did your family not go to church? Why do you think there are so many different religions? Now, I don't think I've ever asked that question. Do you think it's possible for all religions to be equally right? Why or why not? Now, for me, that's a question that's kind of farther down the road. Questions about eternity. What conclusions have you come to concerning life after death? And remember, you're not ready to pounce on their answer. You're in the asking questions mode, the listening mode, the hearing what they have to say mode. These are not questions for a debate. Do you think it's possible to be certain about where you'll spend eternity? Have you ever explored what the Bible has to say about eternal life? Have you ever been able to get a handle on what you think your purpose in life is? I have asked that question. What do you consider your purpose in life? Everyone seems to agree that money by itself can't buy happiness. What, in your opinion, does guarantee a happy life? What is it that really brings happiness? I have asked that question of people. In what ways do you feel you're winning or losing at life? I don't think I've ever asked that question. Do you consider yourself to be a Christian? I had somebody ask me that when I was in college. And the answer that I gave them was certainly, before I became a Christian. I thought I was a Christian. Based on your understanding, how does someone become a Christian? Have you ever explored what the Bible has to say about how somebody becomes a Christian? World events. How did 9/11 affect your view of God and the world? As you watched or read the news, what conclusions have you drawn about the nature of humanity? I think that's an intriguing question in our day and time. Do you believe there is a solution to social problems such as rape, murder, famine, war, racism, and divorce? That is another very poignant question for our day and time. Have you ever had an experience in which you felt the presence of evil? Have you ever had an experience in which you felt the presence of God? In what ways have you seen good and evil played out in your life? Barriers to belief. What caused you to struggle the most with the idea of God's existence? Up to this point in your life's journey, have you met anyone or experienced anything that made the reality of God seem plausible to you? What do you attribute your disbelief in God to? To what? It sounds as if you value open-mindedness. Do you ever find yourself closing your mind to certain things, ideas, or people? What criteria do you use to determine whether something is true? Does your worldview allow for any absolutes? We're going to talk about this next year in messages, these two things, truth and worldview. Questions about marriage. How did you meet your husband or wife? What have you learned about yourself through marriage? There is a basket full of things that we can go in that direction. If you could pass along one word of advice about how to keep a relationship going and growing, what would it be? That's another great question. It helps open up people to the reality of what they're living. Questions about finding God. Why do you think so many people prefer to live as if God does not exist? What would you want God to do to validate his existence and bring you to belief? It's been said many people never find God for the same reason a robber can't find the policeman standing on the corner. What does this saying mean to you? Questions about right and wrong. Some people believe that we are the product of random evolutionary process. Do you think discussions about right and wrong have a place in that kind of worldview? How do or will you teach your kids right from wrong? What authority do you appeal to? Dreams. Do you have any dreams to set life goals when you were younger? What dreams have you had to let go of? What dreams are you still hanging on to? The future. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of the world? Do you think it's easier or harder to raise kids in today's world than it was when you were growing up? What concerns you most when you think about your future? So we're about 5/8 the way through this, and you can take some time to scan through this. But I want to give you just a couple minutes just by yourself, just to look back at these questions, or you can look forward. Look at the ones that you put a check mark by, or you wrote somebody's name by. And then take a brief moment and pray that God will give you an opportunity to take that next step out on the mat with that particular person. So just take a couple minutes right now. Let's pray. Father, it is very clear that you want your people engaged with lost people. And there's a lot that hinges on that for lost people. And it's easy as, no matter how long we've been a Christian, to try to slough this off and just do it when it's convenient, rather than to really be a person on mission with our eyes open to the opportunities around us with lost people. And sometimes we make this much harder than it needs to be, maybe with some wrong assumptions or attitudes. And when that happens, a simple change of metaphor is what needed. We're not in the telling business. We're not in the selling business. We're not in the lecture business. We're in the sharing business. We're in the friendship sharing business. Would you help us to be able to take the next step, to step on the mat, the next step with people that you have already brought to our mind as to what we can do to help move the relationship towards friendship, which is deeper, more meaningful, and eventually all conversations end up leading to the wonder of who you are. All the great questions end up with you. Help us to take those next steps this week. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.